I thought my life was completely over. My sister, Clara, had systematically destroyed the small business I had poured my heart and soul into. She bled my savings dry, leaving me with nothing but debt and a stack of overdue bills. Worse than that, she convinced our entire family that I was a reckless, incompetent failure, an embarrassment who couldn't be trusted with a dime. She didn't stop there. Clara had successfully manipulated our grieving parents into cutting me entirely out of our grandfather's will, leaving her with the bulk of his sizable estate. I was left with a shattered dream and a crushing sense of betrayal from the only family I had left. But what Clara didn't know was that Grandpa Arthur, a man of quiet wisdom and meticulous planning, had one last, powerful secret waiting. A final, perfectly crafted surprise that would not only expose her meticulously constructed web of lies, but would deliver a justice so profound it would unravel her carefully planned life and make her question every cruel act she'd ever committed. This is the story of how I lost everything, only to gain back my life, my name, and my future.
My sister, Clara, was always the golden child. The straight A's, the perfect college admission, the prestigious corporate job right out of school. I, on the other hand, was the messy, creative one. I didn't want the cubicle life. I wanted to build something of my own. I started a small business called the Artisan's Hearth. I made custom, hand-painted wooden signs and jewelry, things that required patience and passion. And it was good, really good. Within a year, my wait list was growing, and I was making a comfortable, independent living. And that's when the envy set in. Clara came from a different angle. She wasn't jealous of the money. She was jealous of the happiness and the genuine, enthusiastic connection I had with my customers. She looked at my life and saw freedom she didn't have, and it drove her crazy.
She first offered to help when I mentioned the administrative side of the business was becoming overwhelming. "You're the creative one," she said with a sweet, patronizing smile. "Let me handle the boring stuff. I'm a finance whiz, remember? I'll set up your invoicing, track your expenses, and file your quarterly taxes. Think of me as your free COO." It sounded like a dream. I trusted her implicitly. She was my sister. She set up her own access to my business bank account and my Square payment system. At first, it was fine. But then the small errors began. First, a vendor claimed they hadn't been paid for a large order of wood. Clara insisted she'd paid it, showing me a screenshot of a transaction confirmation. "Must be an error on their bank's side," she'd shrug, and I believed her. I paid the vendor again, eating the cost. Then a recurring subscription for my design software was canceled right when I needed to finish a major project. Clara blamed the credit card company. "They must have flagged it as fraud," she'd say, all wide-eyed innocence.
These incidents got more frequent and more costly. I'd notice deposits that didn't match sales figures. She'd say it was payment processing fees. I'd see invoices marked paid that weren't. She'd explain it away as tax allocation. She created a fog of confusing financial jargon that, honestly, I didn't have the time or expertise to wade through. I was spending 12 hours a day making things. I shouldn't have to spend another 12 hours analyzing spreadsheets. My business was slowly, systematically being strangled. After a year of Clara's help, I was back where I started, except now I had debt.
When I finally found the courage to tell her I needed to take back the financial management, her reaction was explosive. "Are you accusing me of stealing?" she yelled, tears immediately welling up. "I've sacrificed my free time to help your little hobby while you just sit there and paint. This is the thanks I get? Maybe you just aren't cut out for business and you need to accept that." She immediately ran to my parents, sobbing that I was questioning her integrity and spreading lies. My parents, terrified of upsetting their golden child, pulled me aside. "You need to apologize to your sister," my mother lectured. "She's only ever tried to help you. Maybe you just need to work harder." I was cornered. I lost a sister that day, and I was well on my way to losing my business. The last 6 months were a death march. Clara was out of the business, but the financial wreckage she left behind was catastrophic. I discovered thousands in fraudulent charges and multiple tax penalties she had never told me about. I had to close the artisan's hearth. I sold off my equipment, liquidated my inventory, and was left with almost nothing. The failure was public, and Clara made sure everyone knew about it. She'd post passive-aggressive updates on social media, like, "So proud of my brother/sister for learning a valuable life lesson about entrepreneurship. Not everyone is cut out for the financial risk." She was basking in my failure, cementing the family's narrative that I was incompetent. This was when Grandpa Arthur got sick. Grandpa Arthur was the rock of our family, a self-made man who built a successful manufacturing company. He was stern but fair. He was also the only person who had ever truly respected my business efforts, quietly buying pieces from me and even commissioning large, expensive family signs. He never outwardly criticized Clara, but he had a way of looking at her that suggested he saw past her veneer. Clara, the opportunist, immediately moved in. She became his devoted, full-time nurse and personal assistant. She took over his medications, his scheduling, and most importantly, his private phone line. If I wanted to talk to Grandpa, it had to go through Clara. The conversations I did manage to have were strained. He seemed distant, and sometimes right in the middle of a sentence, I'd hear Clara's voice in the background. "Don't tire yourself, Grandpa. Remember what the doctor said about stress." She began to subtly poison his mind about my recent failure. I know she did. She'd tell him how I blew through all my initial capital, how I was irresponsible and too emotional to handle large sums of money. She framed herself as the only responsible one, the corporate executive who knew how to manage finances. "Grandpa," she told him, in what she thought was a private conversation, a conversation I overheard when I was visiting unexpectedly, "I just worry about my name. If she gets access to any of your money, it'll be gone overnight, and they'll be on the street. I think, for their own good, it needs to be protected, and I'm the only one who can do that."
A few weeks later, Grandpa Arthur passed away. The funeral was a blur of grief and suppressed tension. A month after that, we gathered for the reading of the will. I sat there, dreading the inevitable, but hoping, deep down, that Grandpa knew the truth and hadn't been completely swayed. The lawyer, Mr. Henderson, cleared his throat. He listed the usual bequests, small amounts to charities, some sentimental items to our parents. Then he got to the main estate, the house, the company stocks, the cash reserves. Mr. Henderson read, "To my beloved granddaughter, Clara, for her sound financial mind and her devotion to the family's legacy, I bequeath 90% of my remaining estate." And then the part that felt like a punch to the gut. "And to my grandchild, my name,
Due to their repeated financial difficulties and demonstrated lack of stewardship, I bequeath the sum of $1 as a symbolic gesture and a warning to live within their means. $1. The air left my lungs. Clara gave me a small, victorious smirk, quickly masking it with a look of fake sympathy for our parents. My mother actually shed a tear, saying, "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I know this hurts, but your grandpa just worried about you wasting it." I stood up, numb. I didn't say a word. I just nodded, collected the symbolic, insulting dollar bill, and walked out of the room, leaving Clara to bask in the glow of her $4 million inheritance. I was bankrupt, I was homeless, and now I had officially been declared the family failure in perpetuity by the man I respected most. I packed up my few remaining belongings and moved into a tiny, overpriced apartment. I truly thought I had reached rock bottom.
2 months later, I was sifting through mail when I found a plain, unmarked envelope. It was heavy, and the return address was a small, dusty law office in a town 100 miles away, one I'd never heard of. Inside, I found a key to a small, private post office box and a note written on aged parchment signed with Grandpa Arthur's distinct looping signature. It read, "My dear, trusting my name. If you are reading this, the primary will has been executed. Go to the box. Use what is inside to find the truth and then build your empire. Do not tell a soul." I immediately drove the 2 hours to the post office. Inside the box was a small, antique mahogany box, the kind Grandpa always kept on his desk, the kind he said held his greatest secrets. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside there were 3 items: a handwritten 6-page letter from Grandpa, a small old USB flash drive, and a legal document titled Irrevocable Contingency Trust, FIRA.
I read the letter first. It was dated 5 months before his passing, well before the final, cruel will. Grandpa wrote that he hadn't been fooled by Clara's nursing act. He wrote that he had known her since the day she was born, and he knew her envy ran deep. He explained that if he had confronted her, she would have destroyed the family, so he had to be smarter. "I had to make her comfortable," the letter read. "I had to let her win the small battle to ensure she lost the war. She needed to believe her greed was rewarded. Only then would she drop her guard." The letter revealed he had hired a private forensic accountant months ago. This accountant wasn't just tracking Grandpa's finances. They were tracking every transaction that flowed through Clara's hands, including her time managing my business. I plugged the USB drive into my laptop. It contained a comprehensive dossier on Clara's fraud. Evidence 1, the artisan's hearth. Hundreds of pages of evidence showing every fraudulent expense, every redirected payment, and every tax violation Clara had committed against my business. It was all there, meticulously documented with timestamps and her IP addresses. Evidence 2, the will manipulation. Audio recordings of Clara on the phone with a friend, laughing about how easy it was to convince Grandpa I was a lost cause, and how she was editing the final will drafts to make sure she was the primary beneficiary. Evidence 3, the secret trust. This was the masterstroke. Grandpa had liquidated a major asset before the final will was drafted and had deposited the cash into an offshore trust fund, the FIRA Trust. For me, the amount was nearly $6 million, more than double what Clara had inherited in the main will. The trust was designed to activate the moment the main will was read and settled. The final document was the Irrevocable Contingency Trust. It stated that if
conclusive proof of Clara's fraud and manipulation was ever presented to the family's main executor, a special clause would trigger. This clause would immediately seize half of Clara's main inheritance and donate it to a foundation dedicated to supporting victims of financial abuse and family fraud. Grandpa had gambled everything on my determination to prove my innocence. He had endured Clara's manipulations and allowed me to hit rock bottom, not because he didn't care, but because he knew the only way to truly stop a liar is to let them think they've won. I finally understood. The $1 wasn't an insult. It was a beacon. It was the signal that the game was on.
I didn't confront Clara. I didn't even talk to my parents. I went straight to Mr. Henderson, the estate lawyer, and told him I had new evidence regarding the will. I didn't show him the USB immediately. I just told him I had proof of fraud and wanted to proceed with the contingency trust. He was skeptical until I showed him a single, undeniable piece of evidence, a bank statement proving Clara had used my business funds to pay off her own car loan, which Grandpa's audit had flagged. That was all it took. "This is serious, my name," he said, shaking his head. "We need to call an emergency family meeting. This must be presented in a controlled environment." The day of the meeting, the tension was suffocating. Clara walked in wearing an expensive designer outfit, practically dripping with her newfound wealth. She smirked at me, radiating her victory. My parents were there, looking miserable. Clara, completely oblivious, spoke first. "I hope this meeting isn't about that $1, my name. It's sad, but it's what Grandpa wanted. I'm busy managing my new investment portfolio." Mr. Henderson began. "This emergency meeting is to review newly discovered evidence regarding the execution of Mr. Arthur's will and the conduct of Miss Clara." He projected the full forensic report onto a large screen. For the next 20 minutes, he walked through every single one of Clara's fraudulent actions, the siphoning of my business funds, the fake invoices, the tax penalties. He even played the muffled audio clips of her manipulating Grandpa and bragging about her schemes. Clara turned pale, then red. "That's fake! It's all fake! He's just bitter! I'll sue!" she screamed, pointing at me. "No, Clara," Mr. Henderson said calmly. "It's all real. Your grandfather anticipated this denial. Every piece of evidence has been notarized and audited by an independent firm." Then came the final hammer blow. He announced the discovery of the FIRA Irrevocable Contingency Trust. He explained that Grandpa knew she was a liar and a thief, and that her inheritance was merely a means to an end, to spring the trap. "Miss Clara," Mr. Henderson concluded, "due to overwhelming evidence of manipulation and financial fraud against your sibling and your grandfather's estate, 50% of the inheritance you receive today is immediately forfeited and redirected to the Entrepreneurial Justice Foundation, as stipulated in the contingency clause. Furthermore, your sibling, my name, has been granted full access to the separate private FIRA trust worth $6 million. Clara collapsed into her chair. Her face was a picture of utter devastation. The perfect world she had built on lies had vanished in an instant. She was exposed, publicly shamed, and had lost a massive chunk of her ill-gotten gains.
Mr. Henderson began. "This emergency meeting is to review newly discovered evidence regarding the execution of Mr. Arthur's will and the conduct of Miss Clara." He projected the full forensic report onto a large screen. For the next 20 minutes, he walked through every single one of Clara's fraudulent actions. The siphoning of my business funds, the fake invoices, the tax penalties. He even played the muffled audio clips of her manipulating Grandpa and bragging about her schemes. Clara turned pale, then red. "That's fake! It's all fake! He's just bitter! I'll sue!" she screamed, pointing at me. "No, Clara," Mr. Henderson said calmly. "It's all real. Your grandfather anticipated this denial. Every piece of evidence has been notarized and audited by an independent firm. Then came the final hammer blow. He announced the discovery of the FIRA Irrevocable Contingency Trust. He explained that Grandpa knew she was a liar and a thief, and that her inheritance was merely a means to an end, to spring the trap. Miss Clara, due to overwhelming evidence of manipulation and financial fraud against your sibling and your grandfather's estate, 50% of the inheritance you received today is immediately forfeited and redirected to the Entrepreneurial Justice Foundation, as stipulated in the contingency clause. Furthermore, your sibling, my name, has been granted full access to the separate private FIRA trust worth $6 million. Clara collapsed into her chair. Her face was a picture of utter devastation. The perfect world she had built on lies had vanished in an instant. She was exposed, publicly shamed, and had lost a massive chunk of her ill-gotten gains.
Not with sympathy, but with horror and shame. They didn't apologize to me that day, but their silence and their disgusted looks at Clara were a louder apology than any words could be. I looked at Clara, but there was no rage left, only pity. She wasn't winning anymore. She was just a lonely, exposed bully. I walked out of the meeting without looking back. I was rich, not just in money, but in vindication and closure. I immediately accessed the FIRA trust funds. I paid off my debts, hired a proper legal and accounting team, and launched a new business. Not just signs, but an incubator for young artists, helping them avoid the mistakes I had gone through. I never spoke to Clara again. My parents eventually came around, but it took time. The true victory wasn't the money. It was the realization that Grandpa Arthur had seen the real me and had trusted my future enough to play the long, complex game of revenge. He didn't just give me an inheritance. He gave me the justice and the confidence I needed to rebuild my life, proving to the world and to myself that I was never the failure my sister tried so hard to make me. I was simply the one who finally won.